Hey everybody, this is Angel. You're watching ASMR Angel Reads. Um, I know I never say it, but if you could like or subscribe or share me and get my name out there, I would appreciate it. I know I'm just brand new, so it'll take a while. I understand that. Oh, and also, I broke up chapter 1, 2, 4, and the last part of 5 into 4 separate playlists. Chapter 3 didn't get a playlist because it was a short enough chapter. It got its own thing. So 3 doesn't need a playlist. Anyway, we're continuing with Daggerspell, the second section of chapter 5. Last time they were just talking about what they were doing in the den while they were waiting for the bandits to come back, which aren't really bandits. So at dawn on the morrow, the camp came awake fast. Lord Sligan walked through, yelling orders and keeping the men busy until the horses had grazed their fill and everyone was ready to march. All morning they pushed on fast upriver. Nevin felt his excitement at seeing Bragawin turn to a curious sort of Nevin felt his excitement at seeing Bragawin turn into a curious sort of dread. What was her personality in this life like? What would she think of him? For all his vast age and true dreamer, Nevin was a man enough to want her to like him. Finally, about an hour before noon, they came to the ruined dun. Rodri and his men were at the gates to greet them with cheers. Since there wasn't enough room in the ward for the army to ride in, the men dismounted outside and sat with their horses while the noble-born went in. Looking for Adder, Nevin slipped in too and found him and the 2 elves waiting for him by the dun wall. Genitar and Calandril bowed low. "Hail, wise one of the East," Genitar said. "I'd hoped to meet you again in a better circumstance than these." "I'd been hoping the same thing, truly. It aches my heart that your friend died for the sake of an elded feud." "We'll have vengeance for him," Calandril broke in, "just like we will for all the others." In his cat-slit eyes burned a wild rage. Even though the war to which he referred to had been over for 350 years, doubtless he will remember the name of every elf slain in it. Foe or insult, the Elsion Lakar never forget, and only rarely forgave, although Adern liked to talk of what he called the essential goodness of the folk. They made Nevin profoundly nervous. "I know you must be eager to meet Jill," Adern said. "I saw her not a moment ago, but now she's off somewhere. Shall we go look for her?" Yet Nevin had to postpone the meeting for a little while because Sligan came striding up to them. He looked like a baffled bear when hunting dogs first surround it. "Now here, Nevin," Sligan bellowed. "I'm gravely worried. Young Rodri's gone daft, stark out of his mind." "Indeed, my lord? Let me guess the kind of delusions the lad's suffering from. He swears that Adern and I are both Dwemer and that Adern can turn himself into an owl." "Just that. Sluggin's mouth slackened as he finally realized that Nevin was being sarcastic. "Oh, now here, you're not telling me it's true, are you?" "I am." Sligan swung his head back and forth, looking at both of them in turn, just as a bear swings when his when the dogs close in. "By black hairy asses of hell, what have I done? Ridden all this blasted way to rescue a pack of madmen? Even that silver dagger swears it's true." "That's because it is true," Nevin said. I suppose I have to do some stupid trick to convince you. He, he glanced around and saw a stick of firewood in the grass. Here, watch. When Nevin invoked the wild folk of fire, they rushed to do his bidding and set the stick on fire. Sligan swore, and he swore again when Nevin had them douse it. You can touch it, my lord. It's hot. Sligan turned and ran back to the broch without saying so much as a backward glance. When the two elves burst out laughing, Adern snapped at them in their own language. Reluctantly, they held their tongues. Go get ready to ride, Adern said. Get my horse for me, too, will you? Still grinning, Calendril and Genitar hurried off. It was then that Nevin saw Jill, standing a little distance and watching him as wary as a stag in the forest. Without waiting for Adern to call her, she walked over, studying him all the while. In spite of her dirty men's clothing, in spite of her face that was different than Bragawin for all its beauty, Nevin recognized her immediately. His first muddled thought was a surprise that she would be so tall. Good morrow, Jill. Our Adern told me somewhat about you. Has he now? Good things, I hope. They were. Nevin wished that he could simply tell her the truth, use his Dwemer to make her remember, and pour out his heart to say how glad he was that he found her again. All forbidden by his Dwemer vows. Jill was studying him coolly and curiously. But you know, she said, haven't we met before on the road or such like when I was a child? We haven't. Then I must be thinking of someone else. Passing strange, I could have sworn I'd met you. For a moment, Nevin nearly wept. Even after all these years, she still remembered him. What time? Okay. After a good bit of argument, the noble lords worked out their next moves in the war. Since they had Dwemer men on their side to keep track of Corbin's movements, they could safely fall back to pick up their supply train, then head east, circling around and feigning distance to make Corbin think that they were trying to bypass him in order to take the Dun. Corbin would be forced to follow, allowing them to pick the position for the inevitable battle. In the meantime, they could send a message to any reinforcements coming from Dun Canabane. Cullen idly wondered how many reinforcements they would get. The number depended on how many of Lovian's vassals held steady for her. After the council was broke up, Cullen found Jill by the gates of the Dun. She had gotten both their horses saddled and ready and was holding the reins while she waited for him. I asked Lord Rodri for a boon and he granted it, Cullen said. You're going to be taking messages to Dun Canabane as soon as we join up with the supply train. But by the hells, I wanted to. Do what, ride to war with us? Sometimes I swear that you've got naught between your two ears. I'll wager I could hold my own. Oh no, don't dribble on like a spewing drunkard. So what if you could? I'm not going to let you risk your life in battle, and when you're the only thing I've got in the world, you know that's wrong with you, my sweet. You're like all those young riders. You think that death only comes for other men, not for you. Well, I'll give more than a few of those cocksure young lads their last drink of water, and sat with them while they died. May the gods blast me if I'll risk having to do the same for you. His bluntness hit home. Jill looked down and began fiddling with the reins in her hand. I know what's aching your heart, he went on. You think that I don't value your swordcraft. That's not true. You're good enough to ride with the blade, but riding into battle's a cursed different thing than playing out a mock combat with a musing lord in his hall. Well, true enough, Jill looked up with a faint smile. Da, do you truly think I'm good with the blade? I do. The way she smiled in a childlike delight wrung his heart. It was at moments like these that Colin felt an ugly knowledge pressing at the edge of his mind that maybe he loved his daughter far too well. He grabbed his horse's reins from her. "Don't go getting all puffed up because I said that," he snapped. "You've got the stinking lot more to learn." Leading the horse, he strode away to join Rodri in the warband. Although he knew how badly he hurt her, he refused to look back. When the army headed south to meet the baggage train, Dragid the merchant left them. Jill went over to say farewell to him, and he shook her hand vigorously for quite a long time. "My thanks to you, lass, to you and to your da, too. And here's a bit more than thanks. I know blasted well you two saved my life." Dragid slipped her a small pouch heavy with coin, then trotted off to get his caravan in order. Rather than giving it to her father, Jill kept the pouch. When his hire was over, he'd need the coin, and Da would only drink half of it away if she let him know she had it. When Jill fell back into line at the rear of the army, she found herself next to Nevin, who greeted her too curiously for her to be able to just move away from him, as she rather wanted to do at first. All the Dwemer around her was frightening in itself, that she seemed to understand some instinctively was terrifying. Yet much to her surprise, she found Nevin congenial with his candid blue eyes and his ruddy smile, dressed like a farmer in a plain shirt and brown briga instead of the long robes embroidered with particular signs and sigils of her fancies. Since he'd seen even more of the kingdom than she had, they talked of their various travels as the afternoon wore on. She found herself thinking of him as a long-lost grandfather who sheer bad luck had kept her from meeting him. "Well, tell me somewhat, child," Nevin said at one point. "Your father seems an unusually decent man. The way he cared for you and all. Do you know what drove him to take the silver dagger?" "I don't, and if I were you, I'd never ask him. But he took me with him because he loved my mam so much. She died when I was just a little lass, you see, and at the time I didn't understand at all. Da just rode in one day and off we went. But I've often thought about it. Da had always awful lot of coin from a noble lord's ransom. I'll wager he was planning on settling down with us, getting a farm, maybe somewhat like that, and there'd be rides in to find it. I'll wager he's planning on settling down with us, getting a farm, maybe somewhat like that, and there he rides in to find her dead. He was more than half mad that day." "So he must have been, poor lad. Ye gods, what was the cruel jest his weird had on him and on you and your mam, too?" He spoke with a warm, sincere sympathy that took Jill by surprise. Somehow she'd always thought that people like a silver dagger and his bastard would be beneath the notice of a man who studied strange magics. And yet Nevin was a herb man, too, who tended the poor folk. He made the Dwemer seem a human thing, but there was no doubting that it was the Dwemer nonetheless, and for some reason that she couldn't put into words, she was terrified by the very thought. Late that afternoon, the army met the baggage train, a straggling line of wooden carts servant spearmen just about 3 miles from the coast. Since the carts carried ale, the men had more pleasant camp that night. On the morrow, Colin woke Jill up early. "You'd best get ready to ride, my sweet. Lord Roderi's going to want that message on its way." "Well and good, Da, but I still wish—" When Colin raised his hand for a slap, Jill held her tongue. Have a good ride," he went on, "and I'll see you when I do." Cullen walked away so fast that she knew that she wouldn't see him again before she rode. It was better that way. She hated having farewell to him before a war because speaking the words made them both aware that it might be the last farewell they ever said. It's the middle of the night and I can't sleep, so my voice is low and gravelly. I hate that. And I'm so thirsty. Ugh. All that morning, as the army made its slow way east, Nevin and Adern rode together at the rear behind the carts and servants. Although Rodri had offered them a place of honor at the head of the line, they had dangerous sort of rear guard to keep. At any moment they might have to turn their horses out of line and dismount, because not even the mightiest masters of Dwemer like they could assume a full trance on horseback without falling headlong into the road. No matter what the bards claim, the Dwemer has its limits. I'm truly grateful you've come along, Adern said. By rights, this little job should be mine alone. Well, you'll have to fight the last battle without me, sure enough, but I haven't spent years brooding over Rodri like a hen with one egg just to have him killed by a pack of rebels. Here, do you think Laudeline will try to attack him directly? I don't know what to think. That's why I'm so glad you're here. When Nevin turned in the saddle to look at them, he realized Adern was frightened. We've never faced each other in combat, Adern went on. For all I know, he's stronger than me, and I've never tried to kill a man in my life, while he's already murdered one. By the hells, it's not my life I fear for, but my work. It isn't finished yet. I can't afford to waste all that wretched time being reborn and growing up again, and you know as well as I do that without human Dwemer on the border, there'll be open war between man and elf. So I do. Well, I'm going to do my best to convince your successor that she should take up the Dwemer. And is that our Jill's weird? I'm not certain, of course, but I'm beginning to think so. First, she'll have to be firmly rooted in her ways of her own kind. That's my task then. Well, the Lords of Light will give her omens when her time is ripe. Just so, but that's a long way away, and Elsion Lakar need me there now. Well, if worse comes to worse, I'll ride west. There are others in the kingdom who can do my work in Eldid. My thanks, you can't know how much that eases my heart. Good, but you're not dead yet, my friend. If we stay on guard, we'll keep you alive, sure enough. Near noon, one of the carts shattered a wheel, a common occurrence. Irritably, Rodri announced that the army might as well have its midday rest while the carters made repairs. The men spread out along one of those tiny streams so common in Eldid meadowlands and unsaddled their horses to let them roll, then cluster around the carts to get rations. Since neither Nevin nor Adern ever ate more than 2 spare meals a day, they had time for more important things. They turned their horses over to a servant and walked downstream until the noise and bustle of the army were far behind them. I want a look at things, Nevin said. I'll admit that it'll gladden my heart if you can scry him out. I haven't done much flying in years and my arms ache all day. Nevin shuddered. Even though he'd seen Adern fly many times over the past, there was just something about a shape changer that creeped a man's flesh, even if that man had Dwemer himself. Then you haven't been scrying him out on our etherics? I'm quite simply afraid to meet him there until I test my strength some other way. That is doubtless wise. Well, I'll see what I can find out for you. I have a feeling the young couple like run for the hills when opening under him if he comes fast to face me. Nevin lay down on his back in the grass and crossed his arms over his chest. Adern stood nearby, ready to keep anyone from disturbing him. Nevin slowed his breathing, then closed his eyes. In his mind, he pictured his body of light, a simple man-like form made out of a bluish glow and joined to his solar plexus with a silver cord. He refined the form until it seemed solid, then imagined that he was looking out of the eyes, transferred his conscience over. He heard a click like a sword striking a shield, and he felt his body drop away. He was indeed looking out of the simulacrum's eyes at his sleeping body laying about 10 feet below him. Nearby, Adern's aura was a pulsing egg of soft golden light. His body was just visible within it. The rust red with the vegetable aura, the metal lens spread out under the shimmering blue light of the etheric plane. The stream was a tall veil of an elemental force extending about 50 feet into the air, like a silver waterfall with no river above. Nevin floated up higher in the silver cord, paying out behind him until he was about 100 yards away from his body. Upstream, the army was a fiery glow of intermingled auras pulsing and swarming as the men walked around, a mix of colors, but the predominant one was a blood red of true killers. To Nevin, it was an ugly sight, but he'd been looking for another like it. He went up higher and then flew, gliding over the landscape below in a cold blue light. As he headed north, the wild folks came to join him. Here on their true plane of existence, they had no bodies at all, but were beautiful shimmering nexus of lines of colored light. At times they refracted out into patterns like the glimmer of a bright star, or at others they shrank to the core of a consciousness. As Nevin's body of light carried his mind along, the wild folks wheeled around him like seagulls around a ship. As much as Nevin loved him, they were also a nuisance. If Laudelane happened to be up on the etheric, he would see this army of light coming from miles away. When Nevin ordered them away, the wild folk fled. After some time, as much as one can imagine time on the etheric anyway, Nevin saw a glowing dome of light in a meadow off to the side of the path. He checked his flight and drifted over. The pale silver dome covered fully an acre, and it was marked at 4 cardinal points, and the zenith by a flaming pentagram traced in different colors and set around the sigils of the elements, altogether a showy and perpetuous job of setting an astral seal. Under it doubtless lay Corbin's army. The dome told Nevin just how afraid of Adern Laudelane must be, to exert so much energy to build himself a shelter. Nevin drifted up until he hovered over the pentagram that shone with the pale purple of the element of the ether, whatever. In the name of the kings, allow me to pass by. Like a hatch cover on a ship, the pentagram lifted. So much for Laudelane's mighty magics, Nevin thought. He might well be daft at that. Slowly and cautiously, Nevin sank down through the opening. Laudelane might well have felt his entry and come to challenge him, yet he saw nothing but the pulsing, swarming red mass of the army below. He dropped down close enough to begin to sort out the shapes and the overlapping oars of men and horses, but it was impossible to count them. Rodri would have to contend with the information that Corbin's army was much the same size of his own. As he drifted this way and that, Nevin saw a pair of men off by themselves and floated over for a better look. One's aura was blood red, shot with darkness, and it spun unevenly around the body within. A thin rope of gauzy light fastened it to the other, a shifting, pulsing mass of color that changed as Nevin watched from gold to sickly olive green. Nevin could easily guess that the red aura belonged to Corbin. and scrolled and bound to Lottelaine. Lottelaine's aura changed again and molted brown and gold, then swelled only to constrict suddenly. Ah, ye gods, Nevin thought. He's got so far gone that it's a miracle he can work Dwemer at all. He watched for a few minutes, but never did he see the black line of stress in the aura, which would have indicated that Lottelaine was working Dark Dwemer. Nevin shot up through the door in the seal and closed it behind him. Then he flew back as fast as he could, following the silver cord that inexorably led to his body. He was about halfway along when the wild folk appeared, a frightened crowd swelling, shining, beating about him. He stopped his flight and tried to understand what they were trying to tell him. Since they had no words, only waves of feeling, all he could sort out was that something had frightened them while they were in the dome. He thanked them for the warning, for a warning it seemed to be, then went on his way. At last he saw Addern's clear golden aura and his own body, a lump of dead-looking matter. He slid down the silver cord till he hovered just above, then relaxed and let his mind follow and pull on his flesh. He heard another click, and then he was looking out of his own physical eyes at Addern standing above him. Nevin absorbed the body of light back into himself and slapped his hands thrice on the ground as a sign that the operation was over, and sat up. "Did you find him?" Addern said. "I did." Nevin hesitated, but there was no easy way to break the news. "You're right, my friend. Lottelaine is mad, stark, raving mad." Addern wept, sobbing aloud like an elf. Nevin patted him on the shoulder and tried to think of something comforting to say. There wasn't. Lottelaine, after all, was Addern's only son. All right. That's all I'm going to read for tonight, about 30 minutes. Thanks for watching and supporting the channel. Bye.